I think sci-fi it takes so many risks and it paints in such broad strokes with an array of colors. And I think that's really attractive to people who are using their own imagination to discover who they are.
Hello, my LGBTQs, and welcome back to another episode of A Jaded Gay. I'm Rob Lovelace, and today I am a non-jaded gay because I literally slept 12 hours last night. I was so tired. I passed out before 9, which isn't uncommon for me. Usually I'm in bed by 8, so that was a little later than usual. But yeah, it was a Friday night in bed before 9, and I slept until like 9 this morning. So my body really needed it because I was just feeling the lag all week this week at the gym, going to work, just all the time. My body was just achy. I was tired. So I'm like Moira Rose. I love a good coma, you know? So I'm well rested, and I'm glad I am because we have a very exciting episode planned today with a special guest on to talk about their new book. But before we get into the episode, you know the drill. Let's pull our tarot card. So for this episode, we drew the 10 of Pentacles in reverse. Pentacles is tied to the element of earth, which is stabilizing and nurturing. It's feminine energy, which is reflective and meditative in nature. And Pentacles is all about putting in the hard work and reaping the rewards of our labor. In numerology, 10 is representative of the completion of a cycle, and the 10 of Pentacles is the last numbered card in the Pentacle suit before the court cards. And we also add double digits together, so while 10 is representative of the completion of something, the number 1 represents a new beginning. Now, when we draw this card in reverse, it's telling us that we're breaking with tradition. We may be in a challenging spot with interpersonal relationships, so we might want to break away and do our own thing. It can also represent a fear of moving on, even though our intuition is telling us it's time to go. But if we're questioning if we belong in a certain place or situation, then that could be a pretty good sign that it's time for a change. Because sometimes we can get trapped by surrounding ourselves with the things people assume we should surround ourselves with, whether that's people or material possessions. So this card is telling us that maybe we've completed a cycle and time is up on a certain situation we've been in, and now it's time to start over with a new beginning and listen to our intuition so we can forge a new path that feels more in alignment with who we are, even if that means going against the status quo. So with that in mind, I'd like to welcome our next guest. He is a bookstagrammer. His Instagram boasts of books, butts, and other gay stuff, and he is the author of Godspeed Lovers. Please welcome TQ Sims. Hi, TQ. How are you today?
Hi, Rob. I'm feeling great. Happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, I'm very excited to have you on today, and I really enjoyed your book, so I'm excited to talk all about that and share it with the listeners. But before we do, I like to ask all my guests, are you a jaded or non-jaded gay today, and why?
I am non-jaded. I'm feeling pretty happy. The weather has been sort of crummy here in New Orleans, but today it's beautiful. And I've been working on some projects that I'm really excited about. And I just went to the gym, so I have like those endorphins. I am definitely a non-jaded gay today, this morning at least.
Good. Glad to hear it. Those endorphins always help. You know, like Elwood says, endorphins, like happy people just don't kill their husbands.
I love that.
Well, to kind of kick off the episode, can you tell all the listeners about yourself, how you identify, your pronouns, all that fun stuff?
Oh, sure. So I'm TQ Sims. I grew up on a small farm outside of a small town in Mississippi. And I came to New Orleans as soon as I could. And I've been here for most of my life. And I sort of like include that in my identity as a New Orleans transplant. Because if any of the listeners out there have ever lived in a city or a culture that sort of like gets into you, like it kind of becomes a little bit of your identity. So I've spent most of my life here. I feel like I've lived several lifetimes in this body, just being in New Orleans. And I identify as not just gay, but queer, although I am gay. And I identify as mask non-binary. So I feel like I sort of fluctuate on the gender spectrum a little bit in that regard. Uh, yeah, and maybe that has to do a bit with the privilege of being perceived as masculine. And I'll take any pronouns except for it and its. Like, that's not how I like to be objectified. But he, him works, they, them works. And, she, her is sometimes kind of fun. So it all works for me.
And what you were saying about New Orleans, I could definitely see that because I was actually there last fall for a bachelorette trip just for a weekend, but it's definitely a very vibrant, lively city. There's always something going on. And actually, just back in February, I did an episode on the Upstairs Lounge arson attack, which obviously takes roots in New Orleans. So there's a lot of history there.
Yeah, yeah. Such an interesting story. Yeah, I feel like New Orleans it's one of those cities that you come here and you see so much, across the spectrum. I have a friend who describes New Orleans as magedy, which is, an equal mix of magic and tragedy. Like, it's all here. And when you live here for a long time, like I have, like, that magedy sort of just gets into you.
I love that term. And I can really see that too, because it is a beautiful city. There's a lot of magic and voodoo and witchcraft there, but then also there is some kind of deep seated roots of, oppression, violence, all that. So you really kind of, I mean, I guess you could look at it as like yielding to something beautiful and kind of taking the lessons from that and turning, healing and turning it into something beautiful. But that's a perfect word, magedy.
Yeah, yeah. Coined by my friend Jackie Sumel, who is an amazing artist and activist doing incredible work in prison abolition. So please look her up.
Not to put you on the spot, but as a New Orleans resident, what are your thoughts on Nicolas Cage?
I try not to have too many thoughts on Nicolas Cage. He's an amazing actor. Um, I kind of love weirdos, so I kind of appreciate that he's this oddball character. Yeah, he's just a really interesting person, I think. So, but I try not to think about him too much.
For all the listeners out there who are unaware, Nicolas Cage, I don't know if he's a permanent resident in New Orleans, but I know he's lived down there for a while, and a lot of residents have had issues with him I've heard of alcoholism stories, damaging property, putting up a really ugly pyramid like tomb in like a historic New Orleans cemetery. So
Yeah, so I've heard about the pyramid, which is very, very strange. It's very interesting that he was able to actually build a tomb in that cemetery. I haven't heard the other stories, but
yeah.
I'm sure they're out there. He also owned a very famous, very haunted house in the French Quarter, and I used to live around the corner from it. And it was just always such a creepy house. Like, it felt like there was this energy coming from it. I think it's the La Rue Mansion, which has a very dark history, which, we don't have to go into. But I think Nicolas Cage sold that house. And I don't even know if he's around so much. Maybe the people who had issues with him, I convinced him to leave. And he'll come back when he's ready for his pyramid tomb.
I had a few tour guides who said things, so maybe they just had bad opinions, but I might have to edit some of this out. I don't want to, be sued for slander or anything, but I feel, and I feel like we're kind of moving away from the actual conversation of this episode. So maybe I'll have to have you on for a second one where we could just talk all things New Orleans, because that would be a fun episode. But focusing from, the ghost stories and all that to your career as a writer, can you tell us a little bit about your writing journey?
Yeah, I have always been interested in communicating through art. When I was much younger, I was really interested in drawing and creating visual art. And as I got older, like, I remember even in fifth grade, I wrote a short story that was um, I don't want to say like exceptional to like pat my fifth grade self on the back, but it was clear that like it was different from my peers' work. And I think at that moment, I knew that I was a good writer and that became something that I wanted to do. I was writing poetry all throughout preteens and all throughout my life after that. In high school, I was writing novel length work. I don't think any of it was very good. It wasn't anything that I showed anyone, but I was practicing telling a story in a very long form. And then for a while, I kind of put art aside for various reasons. Uh, One of them being I was doing a lot of drugs. Another one being I was doing a lot of yoga. And it was during the pandemic's lockdown that I was really craving expression through art. And I tried making visual art again, and it just wasn't hitting. So I sat down to start writing, and I started several different stories, and it felt good to write, but I wasn't really connecting with any of those stories. And then one day I had this idea for this story about these two psychic men who fall in love while fighting these sentient storms. And it was just such a weird idea that I had to explore it. And the more and more I got into it and was writing every day because I was in lockdown, it just felt like the right thing to do. And it made me so happy. Like I felt like I had reconnected with a part of myself that hadn't been fully nourished for a long time, even though it was somewhat nourished by writing poetry and short stories every now and then. Writing this book really helped me to connect with a part of myself that I feel like I was missing.
And were you always into the sci-fi genre? Had you always written that and gravitated towards it?
Yes, yes. I remember from a very young age, I was really into Space Ghost, and which was like this really weird cartoon. I think it came on really early Sunday mornings. Was really into that. Really loved Justice League, Superman. Uh, was really into Star Wars. Really loved X-Men. Uh, I lived in a small town, and at the grocery store, they would occasionally get an X-Men comic. And I was always so happy when I could get it because I know that there were probably so many other kids like trying to get that one comic that came to town. And like there was no chance of like following continuity of the story, but I definitely picked up on the queer subtext. And so like all of that has really influenced my storytelling now.
Was there something specific about, Justice League, Star Wars, X-Men, any of those sci-fi series that really drew you in from a young age?
Yeah, I think it's the idea of found family and connecting with a sense of power and using that to benefit others, which sounds so hokey, but I love that stuff. Like I feel like, that's a good message for our community and our world is to really take care of each other and to connect with this power that we're taught we don't have when actually we always have it.
And you kind of, I think some of those answers there answers the next question. But beyond just yourself or maybe the larger LGBTQ plus community, it seems like there is a lot of queer appeal within the sci-fi genre. Why do you think that is?
I think because as queer people, we sort of have to be on this constant journey of self-discovery and self-expression, which often goes against what we're told we should express by many people, not by everyone, but by many people. And I think sci-fi just it takes so many risks and it paints in such broad strokes with an array of colors. And I think that's really attractive to people who are uh, using their own imagination to discover who they are. So I think that's why queer people are attracted to sci-fi.
And with that all in mind, who are some of your favorite queer coded sci-fi characters?
So queer coded, I feel like not explicitly queer. Uh Probably Poe and Finn from the new Star Wars trilogy are, I really love their bromance, but I have a thing for Oscar Isaac. So um, I really love their bromance. And, there are others that I thought of and now I can't think of them. But the one that really stands out in my mind is Ruby Rod from The Fifth Element with this amazing performance by Chris Tucker. Like, I just remember the first time I watched that movie and Ruby Rod came out and he's so extravagant, so over the top, and so sexual. And it just like really hit a nerve with me that it's just like so amazing to see this character who I could identify as queer, even if the rest of the audience couldn't.
And I know what you're saying about Poe and Finn. I there was always that kind of like underlying bromance there. And I know Disney said, "Oh, in the last movie, there's going to be a gay kiss," and I was hoping it would be that, but it was like two people way in the background there. So I was a little disappointed by
Yeah.
that.
For like half a second. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
I feel like we got baited there.
definitely. Disney knows what they're doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so obviously, I'm sure being plugged into, Bookstagram, gay Bookstagram, being a writer and a reader yourself, you've seen a lot of these book bans happening across the country. So have these had any impact on you as a writer and author?
I feel like the impact that it has on me is just like there's this incredible amount of disappointment that we're in this point in our culture. It's sad. It seems so unnecessary. It seems like a violation of free speech. It feels like, one group getting to determine what everyone in the community is getting to experience. And I feel like that's really a good motivator to get out and vote and get involved with local politics. But as far as like my own work, I haven't really been super concerned about that. So, and maybe one day I will be. I feel more I feel more compassion for other authors who are going through this, who are more established, and they've enjoyed the success of having their books in libraries and things, and then they're getting pulled. I can't imagine what that must feel like. I would imagine that it feels pretty painful.
Definitely, and especially because I feel those books that are being pulled, they're not being published for the staunch, hardcore conservative Republicans. They're being published for those fellow members in the community who need these books as an outlet, as an escape to see themselves in the pages.
Absolutely, yeah, and it will have an impact on younger generations, but we're yet to see just what that will be.
Sure. So I guess it's just a motivator to keep writing queer books, to get them out there and just kind of have that be a form of protest, I guess.
Absolutely, absolutely. Just writing the stories that I feel like writing feels really important to me, especially during this time. When I was trying to get my novel published traditionally, I had taken a lot of things out, trying to make it a little bit more marketable, according to marketing trends. And I didn't feel really great about taking some of the more explicit sex scenes out of it because it felt like it was really important for these characters and their journey and the character development, and sort of like editing this for someone else's lens didn't feel great. So I'm really happy the way that things worked out. And I went the self publishing route and left all of that in because I feel like it benefits the story and it benefits the community that I'm trying to speak to. And it benefits me as a writer.
Definitely, because then it's more authentic to the story you're trying to tell. Plus, I think it's funny, with traditional publishing, there's always quote unquote marketability, which I feel is such a subjective term because what's marketable for one person won't be to the other. And sometimes when you're looking to find, an agent or whatever, you see what they're looking for and it's something so niche and so specific. It's like, how would I know to write that? Like, I mean, this is what's coming to mind for me to write. But you have like this, like you want this one specific storyline. It makes it very difficult. But so that being said, I'm glad you kept your authenticity in that. And speaking of divs, cultists, and shadow sages, can you tell us all about Godspeed Lovers and its characters?
Yeah, so Godspeed Lovers is a sci-fi fantasy romance. There's a lot of heart, a lot of humor. There's a thread of secular spirituality that runs through it. And it's the story of two psychics who fall in love while using their powers to fight sentient storms. And then they sort of get caught up in this eccentric trillionaire's devious plot. And they have to extract themselves and save their found family. And in that process, they wind up saving the entire planet. So it's adventure, but it's also romance, and there's technology, but also a sort of magic, and all of those things move the plot along. So it's really wonderful to be able to put this story out there and have people respond to it, and to sort of fall in love with these characters.
I mean, like you said, it's just a blend of a few genres and it's beautifully weaved together. And I love the romance of Oscar and Casey. And I love that because it's a romance, but there's more to it than that. There's, this action plot going on in the background, which incorporates the romance into it. So I love seeing those blends and kind of moving beyond the traditional romance novels, which are still important to see, but having like well-rounded characters beyond just being here for a romance element. They're contributing to the plot. They're, action heroes. They're all these things. So it was just beautiful.
Oh, right on. I appreciate that so much. It's, sometimes when I talk about it, I'm like, wow, this really sounds like complex. It sounds like a lot. But when I write about it, everything gets so integrated. And I feel like it's like, just creating this visual or vocabulary tapestry in order to bring all these elements together.
Obviously, there is the queer romance in there. So how did your experiences as an LGBTQ plus person shape your book?
I identify with all of the characters in some way. I identify most with Casey, I think. He really struggles quite a lot. And he's on a journey of healing and post-traumatic growth. And I feel like a lot of his story comes from my story. I feel like I have found a lot of healing through community, through love, that has just shown me who I can be. And I think that's something that queer community does for a lot of us, and maybe one day all of us. But I feel like that's what community is about. It's about being able to reflect back to someone the good qualities that you see in them so that they see those qualities within themselves. So in that sense, it has my sort of queer journey, or my experience being LGBTQ, informed the book.
And no spoilers here, but going off of that, on page 72, there was a quote that really jumped out at me, and I'm going to read it here. It's, "A lot of divs have a pattern of loneliness, increasing their urge to leave, to do their work intensely, to use their lovers to make themselves feel better." And that quote in particular, it kind of reminds me of some themes talked about in The Velvet Rage and The Best Little Boy in the World. So can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, I mean, that was me reflecting something back to myself. There have definitely been times in my life where I lived very intensely and used lovers in a way that maybe wasn't, that was maybe a little selfish, or a lot selfish, actually. So that's where that line comes from. And that line comes early in the book to kind of show that that's where Casey is in his experience when the audience comes in to really learn about Casey. And then we see him go on a whole journey of, maybe learning how to be open to love and not just using sex as a way of running from his problems, in a very intense way.
Going off of the characters, the world building there, I mean, there's so much. So how did you come up with the concepts of, these different groups, divs, cultists, shadow sages, the geographic location, the technology?
How did I come up with all that? I don't know. um, a lot of it, I just felt like there has to be a sort of structure to this story that I want to tell. And I knew that I wanted characters to have to depend on each other. So if they were a div, they had to have accompaniment. They had to have a comp to sort of keep them grounded as the div is channeling this immense power. And then I wanted someone there who was experienced at channeling that immense power, someone who could teach them. And I came up with the concept of sages. And I knew that I wanted spaceships and space stations, and I wanted action and adventure and sentient storms. So it all just sort of came to me and then fell into place through some trial and error and through a lot of organizing off page.
I can imagine that, writing within the sci-fi genre, it must be somewhat liberating because the genre doesn't have the same confines of the typical day-to-day here on Earth, or, even in terms of species or abilities or, self-expression, things like that. So it must be kind of freeing to be able to create that own world building in the way you view it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Like, I don't think I need to elaborate on that. You said it perfectly.
Well, what do you hope readers get from Godspeed Lovers?
I hope readers really connect with the characters. I hope they, have a good time with the story. There's some fun stuff in there. There's some action adventure. There's some humor. I hope that queer readers see a little bit of themselves reflected in the story. And I hope I hope their big takeaway is that community is so important to us all. And we really have a lot of power when we tap into community. And I think that's one of the primary messages of the book is to just be involved with each other and, be welcoming to each other, act for each other at the polls, in politics, however you see that working for you, do that work.
Definitely. And I'd like to take a note here. I know we talked about it before we started recording, but for listeners, TQ is wearing a Protect Trans Youth shirt, which is very important, especially in this current political climate. I was wondering if you had something you wanted to say about that as it relates to, showing up at the polls, protecting one another in our community.
Yeah, I mean, just wearing a t-shirt like this, or just making sure that the trans people in your life know that you support them, without being too pushy about it. Making sure that your community and even the most marginalized in your community know that you support them is really important.
So do you have any words of wisdom or advice for LGBTQ plus sci-fi writers?
Yeah. Right. Right. I talk to people who have really great ideas for stories, and they wonder like what they have to do. And I often tell them, you just have to write, get words on the page, work with language, even if it's just like taking notes in your notes app on your phone, like write. And then when you're ready, you'll know when you're ready to commit the story to a page, and then rewrite, make it better, like do what you can to make yourself more skillful at this art form. And another way that you can do that is still working with language. Read a lot. Read queer books, read books that aren't queer, just read books that aren't in the genre that you're writing in. Just read nonfiction. Just see how others are communicating, and that will help you understand how you want to communicate. And then, of course, just be true to yourself, be true to your story. Make it queer, make it gay, make it weird, make it beautiful, make it glittery. These are things that the world needs. It's things that people want. So just, if you feel like writing, do it.
And connecting it back to the tarot, 10 of Pentacles in reverse, it's telling us that we're breaking away from tradition and going against the status quo because it's more in alignment with ourselves. And as we talked about today, the sci-fi genre really allows that liberation of exploring a new world. It's a sense of escapism, and it really reinforces the theme of found family and supporting one another in a community. And that sense of support and found family, whether through a sci-fi novel or our chosen family in real life, is very nurturing and stabilizing. It's important to have that so we can be the healthiest version of ourselves and really surround ourselves with the people and places that are in alignment with who we are and who we want to be. And we talked about this on a recent episode, but there's Gay Bookstagram on Instagram, which is an amazing, at least in my opinion, an amazing support system on there of, like-minded writers and readers who want to amplify queer voices. I've seen you on there as well. So I think, I don't want to speak for you, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on it too.
Yeah, I mean, I love it. I love Bookstagram. I love Gay Bookstagram, not only as an author who gets support for their work, but I just really appreciate this sense of community structured around the books that we're reading. I mean, I'm such a nerd. Like, that's very exciting to me. So I think it's a welcoming place, and it's a fun place, and you get to hear people's opinions about the books that they're reading, and maybe it's something that you want to read. So yeah, it's wonderful.
Well, can you tell us about your future projects? Any sequel to Godspeed Lovers planned or any additional sci-fi books?
Yes. So I have so many ideas for stories. I'm trying to complete the Lovers trilogy before I work on any of those other stories. But yeah, Godspeed Lovers is the first in a trilogy. And you've read it. You see, like, at the end, like, it's perfect. Like, there's a complete arc, but it's also set up for the story to continue. And we'll be doing that hopefully later this year. I'm pretty far into the second book. I still have one act to really hone in. It's the last act, and then I'll start rewriting. But hopefully by the end of the year, I'll be able to put out Lovers in Arms.
That's awesome. So definitely all the listeners out there need to go out and buy Godspeed Lovers and read it so that they're all ready to catch up with the new one coming out the end of the year.
Yeah, please. You can find it at theloversuniverse.com.
And besides just Godspeed Lovers, can you tell listeners where they can connect with you and learn more about you?
Yeah, please connect with me on Instagram. It's t.q.sims. I post there pretty frequently. It's not always about my work. I'm bookstagramming, so I'm often talking about other people's work as well. Or maybe it's just like a thirst trap. I don't know. Some meme sharing, but that's a great place to connect with me. And I try to answer every DM that I get. So if you have questions, comments, or you just want to say hi, please drop me a line.
And I'll be sure to include all that information in the show notes. So definitely connect with TQ after this. And then TQ, just to close out the episode, would you mind sharing an excerpt from your book?
I would love to. Yes. So I want to share a short scene between Oscar and Casey. And this scene is narrated by Casey. And this is after they've just met in person for the first time. They've got these superpowers. So they've both had these sort of prescient visions of each other. They've both had this foresight that this person who's going to be important to them is out there. And then they also met on a dating app. So they've just gotten assigned to the same crew, and their crewmates have been teasing them a little bit about this obvious attraction. So they're on to us, Oscar says. Hard to keep secrets around psychics, I tell him. My place? Sure, he says. His smile is controlled, showing confidence more than eagerness. I let him step into the elevator first, and when the doors slide closed behind us, I step in front of him a few centimeters from his glorious nose. He does not back away. His gasp says astonishment, his eyes, adoration. The left corner of his mouth lifts higher than the right when he smiles. You're very cocky, he says, and I feel his words land on my face. I am very cocky. He begins to laugh again and actually bites his lower lip to hold my gaze. I cannot wait to show you how cocky. He backs away, a moment of shyness, but forces himself to return my gaze and keep his eyes locked on mine. I'm not usually so forward. I am, especially when there's a short window of opportunity. Playfully, he says, maybe I'm not ready to have you close just yet. Oh, I take a step back, raise my hands, and jokingly say, my apologies, good sir. He grabs my hands and pulls me closer, and when he kisses me, he keeps his eyes open until I'm melting into them. Our bodies move closer, and we brace each other.
Again, that was an excerpt from Godspeed Lovers by TQ Sims. TQ, thank you so much for coming on today. This was awesome.
Thank you, Rob. I really appreciate it, and I had a wonderful time.
And you know the drill. You can reach out with any questions or feedback about the episode, rob@ajadagay.com. Also, check out the website for more information on TQ, episode notes, links to resources, all that fun stuff. You can also connect with the podcast on Instagram, TikTok, SoundCloud, and YouTube @ajadagaypod. You can follow me personally, Rob Loveless, on Instagram @Rob_Loveless. Also, if you're feeling generous, consider supporting the podcast on Patreon for as little as $1 a month. That's @ajadagaypod. Or you can do a one-time donation on Buy Me a Coffee, also @ajadagaypod. And remember, every day is all we have, so you got to make your own happiness. Bye.